On January 25th, Scotland will be celebrating Robert Burns Day. This is a time when we revere and pay homage to the wonderful poetry that Robert Burns gave us over the course of, well, over 3 centuries ago. And he was a part of the 1700s. And when he wrote his poetry, he was capturing the lifestyle of the Scottish people of that time and some of the quaint things that were happening and also the humorous things that were happening. There's an address to the Haggis that often goes with the celebrations that happen on Robert Burns Day. And so we like to bring out the Haggis, which is a sheep's intestine filled with all kinds of herbs and spices, oatmeal, and organ meats. And then there's a toast with whiskey, and then it's often followed up by a special way of cutting into the haggis and paying honor. What we're going to do today is have a little chat about what does Robert Burns Day mean? What is the poetry that we've been able to use over these centuries? And many of us celebrate the New Year's celebrations using Auld Lang Syne and singing there. And right now, Mariah Carey has that #1 on the charts for her Christmas songs, which is amazing after coming out of the 1700s. So today I have Colin MacLeod here to join me once again for this special edition. And we're going to be talking about Scotland, Robert Burns poetry, and then how that relates to the tunes and the way we're going to go forward with the information that gets wound into all that as we sip on our cup of tea. So welcome, Colin. I'm so glad to have this special podcast.
Michelle, lovely to catch up with you. Hello.
So we started diving into a little bit about the history of tea, and that led us to where tea showed up in Robert Burns's poetry. So do you have a special cup of tea that you've got lined up for today in honor?
Well, I've got some afternoon tea. That's the blank side. This is there's a tune about tea that I'll sort of be playing later on. So this is the conversational side, and then this is the tune side of things. So I've got a cup of it's blended tea mix. It's Crabtree and Evelyn from, I think they're from London. So but it reminds me something that we'll be talking about was how Robert Burns met Clorinda. So we'll be speaking about that later on. So do you have a cup of tea yourself, Michelle?
I do. And I was thinking about what would pay an honor to something as old or going back in the centuries. So I started thinking about my great grandmother's teapot, her golden teapot. And she used to keep it up in the china cupboard. It never came out. I never saw her use it. It was kept for special guests. And obviously I wasn't one of those, being a little sprout running around. But what I've put inside it today is a tea blend from Cape Breton Tea Company that we're just launching, which is Marvelous Miss Maple. And so it has this hint of the maple syrup that we are able to tap out of the trees here in Cape Breton in the springtime. So that's what I put into my cup of tea today. Shall we do a cheers?
We most definitely. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
I always love drinking out of the gold teacup. I feel so royal.
And is that well? Royalty was when people started drinking tea. I think in the 1700s, it was sort of like a select few people who decided to embark on the tea drinking, as opposed to maybe drinking red wine. And is that your parlour, Michelle?
This
Your
is.
parlour.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
I think in Nova Scotia, and this might be, we might find out more in a future podcast from you, Michelle, but the parlour was really a favourite place of tea drinking in the 1700s and the 1800s in Nova Scotia.
Hmm.
And you know, just having that beautiful table and people being able to sit and relax and have a good afternoon's chat.
And the parlor, of course, was where the company got to go, not the family members. They were back in the kitchen with the pot that was on the back of the stove. But yeah, and our parlor here, it has, for those that are not watching this live, but watching or listening as a podcast. I've got a fireplace behind me and lights, and this is a comfortable, quiet place that we sit and enjoy. And we do bring the guests here, but most of the time in Cape Breton, everybody goes to the kitchen. And so you have to actually make a concerted effort to pull them out to get them into the parlor.
Well, it's I think that's a beautiful arrangement, and the kitchen sounds a very warm place as well. And is that where the music happens?
In the kitchen. Hmm. So our piano used to sit
And
in
the
here
com
in the parlor. But what would happen is the party would be in the kitchen. And so we never had a piano because the piano was in the wrong room. So we just moved it into the dining room. And so now if we're sitting around the table and the musicians decide to break out into song in some capacity, the piano is right there and ready for them. And we do have in this house, our house is 1750s, 1750s, 1850s that it was built, and we have French doors that kind of line both of the hallways, so you can close them off, which is how they would have kept the heat in. But for a square set or step dancing to happen, you can open all the doors up, and then you can dance in the hallway into the parlor and back out into the hallway. So it does lend itself to, if the party needs to break out of the kitchen and have a little bit more space, it is possible.
and what type of sets are there? Three sets of people when they're dancing? Would three sets of people be doing that?
If we're doing a Cape Breton square set, it has three figures, and we do four couples in a set if we're doing a traditional set. If we're at the hall in the summertime, it's just a big, huge circle because we want to include all the tourists and have everybody involved in the set without worrying about how many people. You always have to be as a couple, though, because you need to have the ability to separate and come back to each other. But we do three figures, and we always start in a circle, and then we have patterns that interchange between all the people in the set.
It sounds very much like a weaving pattern, like people weaving in and out together.
Absolutely. And you got that grand chain where you're grabbing hands and pass your partner by. And then when you dance with your corner partner, that's the opportunity to have a conversation about what's happening with the neighbors, what happened last week. And then you turn around to get back to your partner in the next part of the set. And then you can say, this is what I learned. This is who the person is. Here's where they're from. And it's a great way for the ice to be broken and for new friendships to be developed. It's a lovely, lovely way to engage with the tourists that come into the area.
And with thinking about Robert Burns in the 1700s, that idea about tea seemed to sort of be a way that people started using it to break the ice. Like I think Robert Burns in some of his letters talks about one of his female friends, Clorinda, and Clorinda wanted to meet Robert Burns over a cup of tea, rather than, meeting somewhere and having a drink
And
in
and
a
and
local
in the
pub.
story that I read on the Robert Burns site was it was, of course, they had colluded, her and her friend, to figure out how they could make this happen. So it was over. We would have a tea party, and then that would present the opportunity. So it could be hidden that way. Yeah,
So, tea could be it's like music. It's like conversation. It's really it's a social facilitator, bringing people together. And when we're talking about Robert Burns and the 1700s, the Boston Tea Party was happened during Robert Burns' lifetime, and I think it was the 16th of December 1773, which means that we're now just over officially into the year of the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party.
Mm-hmm.
So there's Robert Burns was actually, for part of his life, was actually an excise man, a tax man, and at that time he would have, he would have been dealing with the taxes and I think it was one of the lords wanted to, the English government wanted to put tea on taxes on tea, and so Burns would be involved in collecting taxes. So that leads me to the first tune, "The deal's all with the excisemen, the devil's away with the excisemen." So shall I just have a quick?
That's perfect, and I
I'll just
hope that
play.
the people that are listening have their cup of tea and they can relax and enjoy and think about what it would have been like to know that only those people who could afford tea, because of the tax on it, um, other people just had to have whatever else was around or the herbs that were from the garden. They didn't have the privilege of the specialties that were brought in.
And it's really interesting about the word speciality, how it includes tea in it.
You're right. That makes you just kind of want to just skip around, you know? Da 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 da. That's just it had such a nice light feel to it. Now I'm not sure that the excise man felt that, but it is a lovely way to think about moving.
It might that tune, as you say, is sort of like really light, and it might have countered Robert Burns' heavy heart in what he was doing, because I think he used to he loved a rapport with people, and when you're collecting taxes, somebody collecting taxes, they're they're starting off on a very rough, hard footing with people in terms of the relationship. So with a lighter tune, that might have sort of helped to balance things out, like the yin and the yang.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so when he was writing, do you know if he put the poetry first or he just wrote the songs or they came out as they came out?
Sometimes he would write the poetry and then find a song to fit it,
Mm-hmm.
or other times he would have the song and then create words to. So sometimes it was words then song, song then words, and I mean he actually there was a his collection I think has something like 600 songs in it, and he actually looked after some of these songs while he was still alive and put them into, just created them in the way that he wanted them to sort of be
Mm-hmm.
carried on. And I think he did that for about his first 200 songs. But can you imagine just putting pen to paper and the consistency of output? Like, I think his first publication was the Kilmarnock collection, and the Kilmarnock collection of poems. And I remember reading about the Kilmarnock collection going over to the US, and then a lot of people, actually printed bootleg copies of the Kilmarnock collection And that is perhaps one of the reasons why Robert Burns is so well known across the US and in Canada. And, I think it was President Lincoln used to carry a book of Burns poems with him. And it was said that Burns was one of the very few people who actually left President Lincoln speechless.
Wow, I did not know that.
And we were talking about, like where the idea about Burns suppers and the idea about the supper being put in place in order to um, celebrate Burns' life. And I think this started a short while after he passed away. But you've got Burns suppers in Russia, Canada, the US, Japan, Australia, the UK, just all these different countries in the world. And there's actually a statue to Robert Burns that's in Camperdown in Victoria, in Australia. And you've got some of Robert's descendants who are actually over in Australia as well. So he certainly, if although he may have only stayed in Scotland, his words touch all over the world. And the idea about the cup of tea, and I think there's some chronicles. I'd have to have a look more detail. But there's a story about a minister who initially very tentatively, his wife, I think, started having people around for a cup of tea, and over a period of about between 7 and 10 years, he eventually bought her a silver teapot.
And he
Because
actually
when
didn't
people,
want tea presented.
no, he thought it was, again, he thought it was somebody being in association with um, somebody else, shall we say. And or even the temperance movement in the UK at that time, who were, I think they were promoting tea and sort of trying to sort of say to people, hey, could you drink a bit less, a bit less alcohol? And here's an idea of the idea about drinking tea. And it's really interesting to see. With Burns suppers, we have whiskey tasting, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
but you also have tea tasting as well. And Michelle, to have a Burns supper, what um, what what tea might the Cape Breton Tea Company suggest for people who are who are just about to have their Burns suppers?
For a Burns dinner. Um, it would be interesting because a Burns dinner would have your mashed potato, you'd have your haggis, you might have another meat, maybe something with chicken. And so when you put that together, you're looking at a typical black tea. And around here, for sure, King Cole is the king of the teas here because you can get that anywhere. But what I've since discovered, having dove into the tea company and really looking at tea, when you have an organic, really good black tea, it doesn't have the bitterness that comes with it. And what's happened with tea is if you put, especially here, you would put your milk in the bottom of the cup first, then you would pour your tea in. Some people say that was because it meant you didn't have to use a spoon, so it was one less thing to wash. Some people say it was to take the tea and cool it down, so when you poured it into the glass, it didn't shatter the china. But then you also have, if you add that milk, it tempers the bitterness of the tea. So what I've discovered is if you go to a really good quality black tea, then you have this mellow flavor that comes out. The Marvelous Miss Maple, I would recommend as dessert. And if you're having like a clootie dumpling or a trifle or something like that, it would be a lovely addition because you would have that maple piece on the end of it. But during dinner, I would put in just a regular black tea, or if someone doesn't want to drink the black tea having the caffeine in it, then some kind of an herbal drink that has mint in it that would be great for helping with digestion. That would be a lovely tea to put in at dinner time. And if you were having something with hors d'oeuvres before, then it's always lovely to do something in a small glass, even like a shooter glass or something. You can put some berries in the bottom and just dress the whole thing up. If you're doing Robbie Burns, then maybe a little bit of cranberries in the bottom would be fun too, with a cranberry kind of apple. And we definitely have all of those teas in the shop. Just be a matter of which way you'd want to blend them. But you can see how much fun you can have with a tea to be able to dress up all of the meal. And I know that with our performing group, Kaylee Review, that we had during the 90s and the early 2000s, we put on a lot of dinners and we had so much fun with the Robbie Burns nights because of that whiskey tasting and the sampling and all of the traditional pieces, and then the bringing in of the haggis and having the right person to do the address to the haggis, because it's a whole performance. It's not a quiet little thing. And so you want to have that really strong feel and the right accent to go with all of it. And of course, the way to properly cut the haggis. So those are the ways I would add the tea to the meal and then start to enhance and think about how you can build that up.
The tea, I would add that the tea provides a chance to reflect as well. And there's the toast to the ladies, the toast to the gentlemen. There's also somebody who might talk about the Robert Burns's life, and those are really times when you can reflect, and drinking tea is a great way to bring in that idea of reflection about the words and the music.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about the address to the haggis, first verse might be: fair fa your honest sonsy face, great chieftain o' the pardon race, aboon them all you tak your place, pains triper therm. Weel are you worthy of a grace, as long's my arm. Hello, Mr. or Mrs. or Miss Haggis. Welcome to our table. We're really glad. This is the translation, by the way. We're really glad you could come and join us, and we'd love to pay you compliments as long as our arm. And to put these words together and just that flow, that welcome, and you're right, Michelle, with the idea about having a tea, that just is a welcoming tea. And so I made a note about the milk and the tea. I noticed that I think for pouring the best pint of Guinness, there's actually a course in doing that, and it takes 2 minutes to let the Guinness settle. So
Right.
for doing the cup of tea, I think there's probably a bit of art there as well, in bringing that to the table. And
Mm-hmm.
with Burns, he wrote his words over a period of time, like the idea about practicing tea or the art of pouring tea. This is something that's it's a ritual.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a ritual.
Yeah.
And each year we have the ritual of the Burns suppers. Sometimes in Australia, because it's colder in July, they'll actually sort of like have a Burns supper in July rather than January, where they might be in the midst of a very, very hot summer.
Yeah, I'm just
And
thinking about trying to have that hot mashed potatoes with the gravy. And the thing with haggis too that's interesting is we would often have, well, we'd always try to buy more haggis than we needed, so we would have leftovers, and we enjoyed actually having haggis for breakfast the next morning, and then just putting that on the frying pan like you would a back bacon or something like that. And then the bacon and not bacon and eggs, but the haggis and eggs would come out and the toast and everything. And there's your next ritual. It was just a lovely way to celebrate the haggis a little bit further. And we've always enjoyed just the fondness of the next day having the conversation about what happened at the haggis dinner and all the antics that went on, because with our performing group there were always antics, and just the beautiful opportunity to reflect on the music and the dance that was a part of that whole package for the dinner. So that I'm wondering if you have another tune now that maybe brings in some of that idea.
Um, My Love, She's But a Lassie Yet
Hmm.
is one that I think Robert Burns would appreciate, and also um, come down. Well, let's see where it goes. There's a. I'll start off with there's one called Duncan Gray. So again, we're talking about Robert Burns and Clorinda.
I was I was picturing um, Corinda and her girlfriend having that conversation about wanting to meet Burns, and then the anticipation, right? So the sneaking around. Oh, I've seen him. I would like to meet him, and that, but I don't want to be noticed that I'm looking, and that so I da 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 da. So as it was like a little, check out from behind the post beam over here, and then oh well, I'm just going to appear here at the moment, and I'm getting a little bit closer, and then oh, somebody's going to introduce me, and you could just feel that lightness of the spirit in it. And I was kind of taken back to some of the movies and things that have been on lately that come from that same era. Yeah, anything that came to you while you were playing?
People dancing in the parlour, and maybe the two women dancing, and just the idea that Clorinda wrote poems as well, and the lightness, the the happiness of the moment coming through with My Love, She's But a Lassie Yet, and um, just the joy, the joy in the moment. That's what was coming through.
Hmm. Hmm. As you're talking about dancing in the parlor, I know you and I talked before we started the broadcast about the scarf that I'm wearing today. And for those that are on the podcast that can't see, I'll at least describe it a little bit. The tartan I'm wearing is red, black, and white. And as a Highland dancer, I wore the Cunningham tartan, which was red, black, and white. And my neighbor, Diane Quimby, she is an amazing weaver. And at the market one day, the Mabu market here, she had this lovely red, black, and white scarf hanging. And I thought, oh, I could wear that because I'm not wearing my kilt anymore dancing. So it would be the opportunity to still have some plaid that I could put on and be able to celebrate because I love wearing the tartans. Anyway, the tartan, for those that can see it, is actually a way that she put it together that represents the three figures that come from the West Mabu set. And so we have two jigs and a reel is what we would typically dance to. And that's what's represented by the way that the tartan weaves through the patterns. So yeah, I just as you were talking about the dancing in the parlor and setting everything up, it just all of a sudden I could feel the energy pick up on the scarf. Yeah.
It's a beautiful scarf, by the way, and that to have like sort of the weaver in the area as well. There's probably Robert Burns has probably done a tune or a song about weavers as well, and
Mm.
it's I know that he did that beautiful one. I was thinking about the color red. My love is like a red, red rose,
Hmm.
and that really celebrated you know the color red and just the beauty. Um, so thinking about the weaving and the joy that comes into that.
Hmm.
Um,
And if you're looking at a Robbie Burns celebration, you've got the dinner and you have the whole display of the haggis, but you also have the guests performers that would be coming in. So they would typically have some singers that would come in, some musicians, and Highland dancers are always on call for that. So you'd be seeing a chanteuse or you'd be seeing a sword dance, something, maybe the Strathspey Highland Reel where people are weaving in and out. And then we have the Scottish country dancing, and then some of the square sets, so to speak, that they do. They have their set patterns that they bring in, and that would be a whole formal piece because they do go by couples and so many people to make the sets work. And then the contra dancers would have their approach to those same kinds of sets. So if you're celebrating Robbie Burns down in the US, then the contra dancing, those dances actually trade partners. So you start with your partner, but then you start to be traded. So you get to meet people all the way along the circle until you get back to your partner at the end. And which is another lovely way of weaving in and out of conversations and the opportunity to really get to know all the people in the room. It's really interesting when you start to look at what do all these different cultures do and then how do they interconnect their ways of creating community and a sense of involvement and celebration. It's a beautiful tradition.
it really is, and then it's the social glue of communities where people emigrated to Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Australia, Canada, US, and the rituals, and it's the Royal Scottish Country Dance Society's 150th year this year.
Mm.
I think the date might be sort of the month might be October, but these societies and the rituals have been around for 200, 300 years, maybe even longer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the 25th of January has been celebrated for over 200 years. It's just absolutely marvelous. And Michelle, I realise that we might be getting close to the end of the podcast, and you know, um, Burns might round off the evening with Old Lang Syne.
Right.
But what would be a way to round off an evening in Cape Breton, say with the tea? What might be what might people do at the end of an evening?
I'm thinking about all the step dancers would be waiting for the musicians to break into a strass bay. Because when we do the square sets, it's usually jigs and reels. And you have to wait for the musician to decide if they're going to play a strass bay. And if they do, then the step dancers get up. And that first step dancer up dances to the strass bay, which is a little bit slower and a little bit you can hear the syncopation. So it's slightly different than what you would have in the reels. And then they break into the reels. And once they break into the reels, then the step dancers trade off. So if you're in the kitchen, you can have little feet dancing all around the kitchen. You can have grandparents. It's such a multi-generational celebration, but you can see how as soon as the tune changes over to what the dancer can participate in, then it's like the whole room just comes alive. That's what would happen in the kitchen as a celebration, an informal celebration, if it was a Robbie Burns celebration in the house. Yeah.
Well, thinking there's a tune called Earl Grey, which is a suspect, and it's named after a pub in the north of England. But if we say that that's a very loose association with tea, but I can play that one and then maybe go into a tune called Kate Dalrymple, which is a real.
And I'm just going to add that as you said that, the Earl Grey, we have Queen Mary is the blend that we carry, which is a creamed Earl Grey, which means you don't have to add the milk to it because it's already soft and mellow. So as you go to play that Earl Grey, I'm just wanted to plant that seed of soft and mellow and just what people can bring into the last part of the podcast.
And that would actually be that would be something else for a Burns supper as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Excuse me. You've always got to be tuned in.
If I thought I wouldn't bounce the computer right off because our floor, of course, would bounce, I would have been up doing a reel to that because that was so beautiful. Thank you.
Very welcome. Well, Michelle, thank you very much. I think the association of Robert Burns and tea, it really adds a new blend to things.
I hadn't thought of it
There,
in that term. Yep, exactly. Sorry, go ahead.
um, I've seen that some activities actually have a tea tasting instead of a whiskey tasting for um, a Robert Burns evening or a Burns supper, and you know, it really it's something to relax to and reflect on.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping that people, as they've been enjoying the podcast, they've been listening, that they're thinking about what tea they have in the cupboard that perhaps is getting to the back and they haven't brought it forward. Tea, you don't want it to go stale. You want to keep it always alive. So making sure you're turning over that tea and drinking it rather than saving it because it's a blend that you enjoy but you never get to. So making sure you really do the ritual, make your tea every day, enjoy it, and sit back and relax with the podcasts and enjoy listening and learning. So, Colin, on that
Well,
note, before we go, do you want to tell people how they can find you and also what you have in the works that you've got planning for?
okay, so people can find me at celticfiddleguru.com. That's a www.celticfiddleguru.com. And this year, we've got our online classes, which are just about to start on January the 21st. Absolute beginner, beginner, and immediate Celtic fiddle classes. There's a regular Celtic music jam that happens on a couple of days a week, Mondays and Wednesdays at the moment. And there is going to be a special tour of Scotland in September between the 12th. It'll be around the middle of September, maybe the 12th to the 24th. And it's going to be the Seven Chakras tour of Scotland. So, Michelle, that might, I think that's probably another podcast to explain it. But basically, it just, we focus in on the senses and the experience of being in Scotland. And it could be food, music, some of the history, the ancient sites, and just bringing it all together so that people just really do experience the magic of being in Scotland.
And then all that history that you've been able to share even so far to bring forward, and then what you are able to bring with your music. That's beautiful. And the classes that you have running, they're all online?
Yes, they are all online. They're self-contained courses, so people can actually step in at any time. At the moment, we'll be doing a welcome, so there will be a live class at the end of these are 6-week courses. So we'll have a welcome class at the beginning of the course. At the end of week 2, we'll have a live class to look over and play the tunes from weeks 1 and 2. Then the same at week 4, and then at the end of the course, we'll have a look at the broader picture, and any questions and answers can be emailed through to support@celticfiddleguru.com. And for any more information, email support@celticfiddleguru.com or go to celticfiddleguru.com. And we look forward to
And
being
check it out.
in touch with people who might be interested in that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm even thinking about being able to jam online. You know, I know we can get together with people now, but at the same time, it's so cool to be able to link up with people from around the world and just hear what other people are doing and be a part of a different kind of community. So it's an excellent service that you're providing everyone.
Thank you very much. And we've been able to get it. There's a couple of platforms that we use, and we've had people from Austria, USA, Scotland coming together and say playing a slow air where you've got melody and you've got harmony and just everything in line. Some of the faster tunes, there's still a bit of catching up to do, but it really, it just connects people. And I think like the idea about the tea, a drink of tea with people, it's just this social connection that everyone coming back together, especially after the, so much time as individuals, and that really is just such a great way to connect.
That's beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me again and to be able to honor Robert Burns with a talk about some of the different aspects of his poetry that people might not know. It's been a lovely conversation. Thank you, Colin.
My pleasure. And Michelle, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So they can find me at dancedebut.com. The best way to look up all of my resources, because I have my video channel, my podcast, if they go to Linktree, so HTTPS and then :// linktr.ee/dance debut. And I know that's a big mouthful, but when you get there, you'll see how all the resources, you just can click on anything you want to look up. And so that's supplies, books, cards. And for the tea, it is the Cape Breton Tea Company. And that one is CBTTEA Company, all spelled out, .square.site. And I just posted our latest blends. So Marvelous Miss Maple is in there. And we have Queen Mary that I did mention. And there are a few other nuggets in there. And if you check out the stories, you can see how you can pair the tea with cheese as another option. And if you're thinking about Robbie Burns, then please celebrate with a great cup of tea and the ritual that you have with maybe some china that's in the back of your cupboard. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you very much, Michelle. Bye.